that we touched on last. Let's talk anonymity, right? Because so I'll let you describe how you approached anonymity in the book and the conclusions you drew, because I think this is the bit we've got to talk about.
Yeah, yeah, we had quite a long, between the three of us, we talked quite a lot about this and what our sort of view of this was. And I guess where we wanted or where we thought we'd get to is a sort of a clear view of what it should, whether anonymous is good or not good, confidentiality as well. But where we really, in the end, I guess we sat on the fence. We sort of, I don't know, maybe we took the fifth. Because actually it just depends on the culture of it depends on the culture of the organization. So just exactly as you say, I've been in situations where leaders are very frustrated by this. And in some situations where they go further and they say, completely showing a lack of understanding of how these things work, we want a culture where people don't feel they have to be anonymous. Therefore, we're not allowing any anonymity. Guess what, guys? You didn't get many questions. Or people didn't feel that they would speak up. And it's sort of, oh, well, if we keep doing it this way, they will in the end. That sort of will force them there to make an approach, which I don't think is a good one. Anonymity is right in certain situations. I've done a lot of these things, and I thought quite a lot around how it works with the questions that get asked at these things. Whether not having many questions is a good thing or a bad thing, or whether the questions weren't the questions you were hoping for is a good thing or a bad thing. And, it's difficult to be too sure. We'll all have our own views. There's also a cultural lens to this, as others have reminded me. In some countries that there is just a greater desire for anonymity or greater fear if I put my name out there. Maybe, I don't want to ask someone who's more senior a difficult question because that's just not how it's done here in some cultures. I think you've got to be respectful of that. But I think it's about, ultimately, it takes time to build trust in an organization. And if anonymity suits where you are and allows people to be part of the conversation, then you should embrace it, and you should be prepared to have difficult questions, even questions that you'd rather not have, and show that you're prepared to answer them, even if they're not the questions that you would choose to have. And I think then over time, and not just through this, but you build trust, and you'll get to a position where you can start to say, okay, we think we've come a long way. Let's try and have this conversation without the need for anonymity. But I think that, it's not just about the questions you have in a meeting. Trust comes from all aspects of the organization. If you go through a particularly tough redundancy program, don't think that people are going to jump to trust you, if it's 6 months on from the previous redundancy program. So I think there's lots of factors here in terms of how people feel about organizations. Anonymity has its place for sure. But we should all be working to build really strong trust in an organization where you don't need it.
Yeah. Well, okay. So that's, so again, we are more in agreement than we're not. I mean, so the way we see this, so here's my take, right? And here's the way I think organizations should start seeing anonymity. So think less of it as a question of culture and think more of it as a question of inclusion, right? So in the same way that we can have the conversation about, our culture means we want to be in the office or we don't want to be in the office. As soon as you go all in the office again, then you're becoming a less inclusive workplace because we drive some people out, right? Anonymity as part of, again, we come away from surveys and town halls and say, okay, how do we need to listen to people? Then we need, and see that this is Harkn's very strong view on this, right? So we are an exclusively anonymous platform. So everything on Harkn is completely anonymous and it's done consciously. So it is not to replace town halls. It is not to replace conversations on Teams or Yammer or Slack. It's not to replace interaction one-to-one and meeting rooms, but it is to say, look, we need to embrace as many voices as possible. And if we want that to happen, then we need to level the playing field. And then we can equalize voice by removing any sense of status, power dynamic, any bias, and they still exist, right? You can ask any, I mean, we talked about this, didn't we, with Marie, that we know there are questions for women to, that still their voices don't carry as loudly or as well in the room. And then we get into questions of ethnicity, and other minority groups in the workplace don't get their voices heard as well. And so suddenly, for me, it echoes back to an Indian organization that we work with, where their challenge was, can you get people to speak in our company? Right. And about a month in, a lady in that company wrote to us and said, what I love about Harkn is it's finally about what's being said, not who said it.